Morning everyone. Thank you for coming at such a short notice. Today we have with us Milan Rastogi, who is the Forest and Climate Minister of India, and Akshat Jain, who is the Chairperson of African Union and the President of South Africa.
Thank you, Manan, for introducing us. It is our pleasure to meet with you to discuss on one of the biggest concerns that of the world today.
Thank you, Manan, for inviting the African Union for this climate meet. Hope we end up with a positive discussion and a positive result out of this meet.
Thank you. My pleasure. So the main agenda of this meeting will be first discuss our respective nations' goal towards climate change and what we are doing to achieve them. And then we would also have a discussion about what we can do better collectively to combat this climate change situation. So first of all, we will start the presentations of all the nations one by one, and then we will follow up with a discussion.
Hello, I am Akshat Jain, and in the individual project on Climate Summit, I will be presenting the African perspective based on climate change and the actions taken by us, whereas my colleagues Milan and Manan would be presenting the Indian perspective and the American perspective respectively. I will also be emulating as the chairperson of African Union as well as the president of South Africa. So as we all know that climate change stands out as a prominent and pressing issue in our 21st century, and it poses significant challenges for our communities, and understanding climate change is often referred to as global warming, which is a critical concern. Although we contribute only a minimal share of global greenhouse gas emissions, we face substantial risk from the effects of climate change. It is because of our limited infrastructure and very few technological innovations. There are variations in rainfall, escalation of temperature extremes, and elevation of sea levels, etc. And thus, because of it, we stand out as the most vulnerable region in the world, in spite of being the region with very less greenhouse gas emissions. And we need to recover from the severe impacts of climate change and need to take very strict actions. So these are the projections which are made by various organizations that could harm us. The first one is the sea level rise by 10% as compared to the global mean by 2100, which would mean that our countries along the coastline, mainly Madagascar, would be submerging under the sea, which is very harmful for our population. And our land temperatures are already very high as compared to the global mean, and rise by 3 to 6 degrees C by 2100 would mean very high rise in the temperatures of our ground, and this would bring about agricultural drought and many other severe issues. And we would be requiring $5 to $6 trillion for the climate adaptation and mitigation by 2040, and $2 to $3 trillion by 2030 itself. And this financial burden is beyond our means to attain, and we would be requiring a great international support. By 2050, the rain-fed agricultural productivity would be decreasing by a major 50%, and agriculture being the most important occupation and is occupied by more than 75% of the population. So it would lead to extreme poverty and various issues. And by 2080, our wheat production would be disappearing along with the maize productivity, which would lead to food scarcity. And these projections are quite extreme. So we need to take care of it and reduce it as much as possible. These are the objectives that are being taken by us to tackle climate change. One of them is to reduce our carbon emissions by 33% relative to the baseline set by Paris Agreement by 2035. And we also aim to boost our agricultural sector to provide 17 billion jobs, which would ultimately reduce poverty and would support our 75% of population. Many of our nations, mainly 45 out of 54, have aimed to increase our renewable energy generation by 50% till the end of this decade, which would lead to less use of fossil fuels and very less emissions of greenhouse gases. And thus, we aim to achieve the net zero GHG emissions by 2080. Though the Paris Agreement has set it by 2050, though it wouldn't be possible for us to achieve it till 2050. And we also aim to make the Great Green Wall of Africa a reality by 2060, which would be a huge boon to the agricultural sector and the drought
Hello everyone, I am Milan Rastogi and I will be representing the Union Minister of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. India is working hard to fight climate change. We have increased our solar power capacities a lot and have kept our promises from the Paris Agreement, something no one else amongst the G20 nations could. We want to believe that taking care of the environment should also help us grow our economy and improve our people's lives. And we are ready to work to find solutions to that end. We are currently investing in new ideas and green technology, and we want to do even more to reduce our impact on climate change. So, I will be first highlighting the problems that our country is facing due to this climate change. The warming of oceans due to climate change has caused India's coast to be prone to several typhoons and cyclones. We have had losses of several lives in Gujarat, Chennai, and many other coastal areas as well. Mumbai is one of the cities that is said to submerge if the ocean level keeps on rising continuously as it is now. Climate change reduces crop yields and lowers the nutritional quality of our food. It is projected that our wheat yield will reduce by 19.3% and our rice yield will reduce by approximately 3.5% till 2050 if the change in weather patterns continues like this. Moreover, the average temperature of our country is set to rise from up to 2.4 to 4.4 degrees Celsius. In peak summers, India already faces a temperatures of around 50 degrees Celsius, and further increase in these numbers is simply unacceptable. Now, we would like to highlight some of our achievements that we have made in the past decade to combat climate change. Firstly, India plans to achieve an emissions intensity of 45% below 2005 levels by 2030. To that end, India is continuously increasing our forest cover and increasing reliance on renewable sources for our energy requirements. India's current emission level is equals to 4.6 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. However, if we continue growing at this rate, then we will be able to reduce our emissions to 4.1 to 4.4 gigatons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. Moreover, India also plans to harness 50% of its cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel-based sources. In its budget for 2023, India has allocated $8 billion for new clean energy projects, including green hydrogen and renewable energy initiatives to promote clean growth. As of March 2023, we have installed 125 gigawatts of new renewable energy capacity. India has also made a promise to increase its non-fossil fuel-based energy capacity up to 500 gigawatts, as opposed to the 450 gigawatts proposal earlier by 2030. In the end, I would also like to highlight that India aims to achieve the net zero emissions target by 2070. To that end, we are currently investing 4.3 billion dollars to reduce our emissions from petroleum and natural gas. We are also planning to create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent through increasing the forest cover by 2030. India has also promised to reduce its carbon emissions by 1 billion tons to protect the environment. We as a country are doing what we can to combat climate change. However, even our hands are tied. We have a large population to look after, healthcare to take into account, food to give. We simply cannot expend a lot of sources on just climate change. Therefore, we would like the help of developing nations with our climate policies so that we can further grow and help out others. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Manan Kabra and I will be playing as the Environment Minister of United States of America. So we are committed to combat climate change and we have made significant progress in this regard. We have added 13.2 gigawatts of utility scale solar capacity in 2021, a record increase of 25% from the previous years. This demonstrates our nation's dedication to renewable energy and its efforts to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. We have also ranked second in the world for green technology investment, with 114 billion invested. The total investment in low carbon technologies reached $755 billion in 2021, a 25% rise over the previous year. Now, talking about the problems which we have faced due to climate change, the first one and the most evident one is more extreme climate events like heavy rainstorms and record high temperatures are becoming more common. We have seen the example of typhoons like Katrina, which hits the shore of USA, and they are getting more and more powerful with climate change. Second is climate change was linked to a range of health issues, like we saw the example of Zika virus, and women are said not to get pregnant during those months. So, and including heat-related illnesses, the spread of infectious diseases, and worsening air quality. Third one is after Trump took himself out of the Paris Agreement, so re-establishing international leadership is a main problem. President Biden has rejoined the Paris Agreement, but to remain on track, the US will need to follow through on its pledge. So now I will talk about the objective and achievement our government has achieved. So first one is passing of a major smart economic stimulus package. So the Congress under Biden has enacted the Inflation Reduction Act in August 2022, the largest piece of climate legislation in US history and maybe the whole world history. It establishes a comprehensive set of clean energy incentives, mostly through decade-long tax credits for everything from electric vehicles to direct air capture and sequestration of carbon dioxide. Economic modeling suggests that it could reduce 2030 emissions by 1 billion tons, leaving a 0.5 billion tons gap that could be closed by federal regulations. The second achievement is tackling of superpollutants. So what are superpollutants? Superpollutants are HFCs and methane, which are emitted in smaller quantities than carbon dioxide, but pound for pound tap much more heat. Biden administration released an updated methane action plan, which includes 50 specific measures backed by $20 billion in funding. Biden also helped launch the Global Methane Pledge at the 2021 UN Climate Summit. As of January 2023, 150 countries have signed on to the pledge and committed to cut their total methane emissions by at least 30% by 2030. The next achievement of USA is ambitious new targets and commitments. In April 2021, we have set a new national goal to reduce emissions by 50 to 52% from 2005 levels by 2030, formalizing it in an updated nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement. Further, 50% electric vehicle sales share by 2030, 100% carbon pollution-free electricity by 2035, and a net zero emission economy by 2050. Achieving these goals will be a major challenge, but it remains within reach thanks to progress made in 2022. So thank you. This was our country's situation regarding climate change, and we hope to have a fruitful discussion next. So thank you everyone for such informative presentations. And now we all have a good idea of where our country stands at the climate situation. As we all know, we have all gathered here to discuss the biggest problem we are facing, and that is climate change. Before the COP28 to be held in the December this year, we would like developing nations like yours to come forward in combating climate change, which is a global issue and needs cooperative efforts.
That all nations, whether developing or developed, have to work collectively to mitigate climate change. Our country itself is working towards transitioning to renewable energy sources to combat it. We plan to harness 50% of our electric power from non-fossil fuel-based sources. We have also planned to add additional forest and tree cover to achieve a carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030. Moreover, we aim to reduce our carbon emissions by 1 billion tons. I believe that these policies of ours will have a significant impact on the climate change, and they will lead to it slowing down.
I too agree that all nations have to work collectively and irrespective of the repercussions they face. And our entire continent is working towards reducing our already low emissions to a negligible level. We collectively as a continent are working towards building our great green wall of Africa, which is to create and cover our forest and entire grassland mosaic across all our countries. and which would help us in reducing our carbon emissions by 33% relative to the baseline set in the Paris Agreement by 2025. And we also plan to restore 40 million hectares of that land by 2060. We are also working hard towards increasing our renewable energy production to 50% by the end of this decade, but we are facing several financial and technological problems to achieve this level. We are also running late from the Paris Agreement in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and we would become a net zero greenhouse gas emitting continent only by 2080 collectively, with some nations reaching net zero by 2060 and 2070. We are trying our best to mitigate climate change and decrease our vulnerability to the consequences that we might face, but this would require huge support from the rest of the world.
So I would like to congratulate both of you for working in the right direction. But I would also like to tell you that your efforts are falling short, keeping in mind the severity of the situation. I would like to point out some of the flaws in Indian and African policies. So India is aiming for going to 50% of renewable energy by 2030, but it is a very low target as India has already achieved 40% renewable energy by 2023. So it should at least keep its target to 60 to 70%. And India is also planning for 25.5 gigawatt of new coal power plants. And I think this plan should be dropped or the number should be reduced at least. For Africa, as promised in the Paris Agreement, they should have to cut down their greenhouse gas emissions to zero by 2050. But they are planning to do it by 2080, which is a huge gap of 80 years. So they should also set new targets.
In spite of very low emissions, we are facing this huge risk of running late by 30 years in lieu of net zero emissions. And it is because of the limited infrastructure and the technological innovations, along with the regular calamities that we are currently facing because of the emissions caused by developing countries and developed countries like you and India. Close to 40 of our countries will be becoming net zero emitting by 2060 and 2070, but still some countries would be remaining. But we require huge funds and support to reach that level by 2080, though we aren't receiving any financial or technical support from most of the nations, and which includes you, the USA, and the entire Europe. And this is the main reason of us to achieve the net zero emissions by 2080.
Uh, from my side, I would like to point out that our journey to transform to 40% of the non-fossil fuels-based sources has not been easy. We have had to invest a lot of resources which otherwise would have been used for healthcare and development in other sectors for our country. Moreover, it is not just that we have to invest resources to transition to renewable energy. We are also investing our resources. We have had an investment of $4.3 billion in this year's budget to achieve our goal of net zero emissions by 2070. This will include trying to reduce the emissions from already existing power plants, as well as finding ways of culling the new power plants that are planned in the future. However, on the other hand, when we see towards USA, we realize that they had withdrawn just a year after signing the Paris Conference under Trump's presidency. So how can we actually trust your word, trust you or take your word?
So we accept that mistakes have been made in the past and we are very regretful of Trump's government mistakes. That's why when President Biden rejoined the Paris Agreement on the very first day of his office, I hope that it will not happen again. And USA can mention that a significant portion of its population supports climate action, putting pressure on the government to take meaningful steps in reducing emissions and transitioning to renewable energy resources. And I would also like you to tell you about the economic opportunities it brings. Transitioning to renewable energy sources presents various opportunities. The USA can point to the growth of green energy sector, job creation, and reduce reliance on fossil fuels, which can enhance energy security of both the countries.
Yeah, I agree to the above economic opportunities that would be provided in mitigating climate change. But the main issue that we face is the lack of funds. we are currently requiring close to $2 to $3 trillion by 2030 to completely mitigate climate change and achieve the levels that we want. But we currently only have 10% of that required amount, even if we combine the GDPs of all our nations, and we aren't getting any support, whether it be technical or financial, from nations like you. And we just can't allocate our entire GDP towards just combating climate change, as we also need to decrease the poverty and other issues which we are currently facing. Also, I would like to point upon one point that USA in one of the parliaments had agreed to pledge $13 billion per annum to mitigate the climate change, but are currently allocating only $1 billion per annum. So, and they are expecting us to delve all our funds into mitigating climate change, but they aren't themselves doing that. So, I want to question you upon that. That how are you expecting us to follow this?
Um, while it is very good that like investment in renewable energy sources can provide job opportunities, it is also the truth that establishing a renewable energy source requires much more resources and money than as compared to a coal power plant. Currently, India has done as much as it can, and without any help from any nation to combat climate change. In fact, we are the only G20 country to fulfill our Paris Treaty agreements. On the other hand, America has done nothing, in fact, to assist us. Moreover, if we look carefully, most of what we are facing as climate change is more or less the fault of the developed nations like America and Europe. But still, you haven't contributed as much to the climate change as you should have done. You still have coal coal power plants running in your country, and you are questioning us on whether we should use coal power plants or not in our country.
So I would beg to differ from you at this point. So we at USA are not making new coal power plants, and around 75% of our funds for energy are going into renewable energy sources. So it's not that we are doing nothing to mitigate the climate change problem, but we are also not denying your right to make your own choices about what kind of energy you want to use. But if we see deeply, we are all inevitably making our own countries less livable. We are coming close to crossing many of the planetary boundaries and have even crossed three of them. If we do not act collectively now to address this situation, there will be nothing left to mourn over. We are slowly, and to tell about Akshat's point that around of $13 billion. So this act is in its very initial stages. So we are slowly increasing the amount, and within next 5 years, we will surpass our promised amount of $13 billion, and it would also have in it some foreign support, which will help the developing and underdeveloped nations to mitigate climate change.
So I think what we are doing now is just playing the blame game. We are just blaming each other, and this won't take us anywhere, I think. So we all need to compromise with some sort of our interest and make the world a better place to live in. I think we all need to act collectively and not differentiate between any country or any particular continent, else one would be facing more problem and the other would be facing less. We need developed nations like you to share the technologies and funds with the developing nations and support them both financially and technically. And in this way, I think we would be able to combat climate change without affecting each other and for the good of our people.
So I completely agree with what Akshay said. From day one, America has been at the forefront of humanity's battle against climate change. Since we are one of the most technologically advanced nation, we are ready to provide India and Africa with the necessary financial and technological support. However, we need commitments from both nations. India has to stop all its new fossil fuels based future projects, and Africa needs to revise its target of net zero emission by 2080 to 2050. Furthermore, we would also need your support for the COP28 meeting to be held this year in Dubai.
So regarding your conditions, I cannot completely guarantee that we will be able to completely eliminate from our future plans the need for fossil fuel-based power plants. But we can promise that we will try to reduce its number by the best of our abilities. Besides, we are ready to full-heartedly give you our support in COP28 to reduce the climate change effects.
Yeah, even I agree to commit and better our efforts in mitigating climate change, especially achieving net zero emissions earlier than we expect now. But it would be requiring significant support from countries like yours. And without that support, we won't be able to achieve our goals, and thus would also refrain from committing to all these points discussed upon. So yeah, there are some conditions that we might have to put forward to completely agree and commit to better our efforts.
Yes, so thank you. I think that was a very fruitful discussion, and we would all come together to combat climate change, and we will win over climate change as we did over chlorofluorocarbons and the ozone layer depletion. Thank you.
Thank you.